Welcome back to the 3 months of Modal Logic, the sequel to 100 Days of Logic here at Carneades.org. Today we're going to be continuing with the final 10 days of logic, looking at a special video, the first of two very special videos, the ethics of belief, the marriage of deontic and doxastic logics with Clifford and James. Now, when looking at doxastic and deontic logic, there are two questions that we can ask. What do people believe about ethics? And what is right to believe? It seems that the first question to me isn't terribly interesting to the philosopher, but the second question is very interesting. So, in this video, we're not going to focus on the first question, but on the second. And to do so, we will engage with two of the most famous papers on the subject. William Clifford's The Ethics of Belief, and William James's response, The Will to Believe. In this video, we will look at the ethics of belief, and in the following video, we will look at the will to believe. Okay? So, these videos are going to be talking about what is right to believe. We're going to go over the arguments, and then we're going to stay with the modal logic theme, show how these modal logics, this deontic and this doxastic logic, can be directly applied to this argument. Let's take a look. So, imagine a ship owner who's about to see off his ship packed full of immigrants. He knows that the ship has been on too many trips. It has been too long without maintenance. But the owner suppresses his doubts, because an overhaul would be costly, and surely Providence would not kill so many young women and children. He comes to suppress his doubts, and therefore form a sincere and honest belief that the ship is seaworthy. And, to quote Clifford, he got his insurance money when she went down in mid-ocean and told no tales. If you want to, I highly encourage you to read the paper. Clifford does a fantastic job of painting this picture, and it's interesting to note Clifford himself was in a shipwreck during his life that clearly affected him. Now, Clifford explains that the ship owner is culpable for this accident, not because his belief that the ship was sound turned out to be false, but because his reasoning was not driven by logic, but rather by emotions. He was not justified in his conclusion, so he's responsible for the deaths. It didn't matter if his conclusion was true or not, or that his conclusion was false. It mattered that he was unjustified. The reason he came to that conclusion was a bad reason. He didn't have the correct justification. According to Clifford, even if the ship had survived the journey and had sailed for many years to come, the owner would have been just as liable for his belief, since it was founded on unjustified premises. This is going to be the central idea that Clifford is now going to defend a little more philosophically. So here's a summary of Clifford's argument. It is obligatory that in giving an unbiased, rational assessment of your actions, that you do not have any unjustified beliefs. So basically, in order to correctly and morally give an unbiased and rational assessment of what you should and shouldn't do in a situation, you don't have any unjustified beliefs within that assessment. And it is morally obligatory that you give an unbiased, rational assessment of all of your actions. Therefore, Clifford concludes that it is morally obligatory that you should only believe things that are justified. Though the skeptic, of course, wouldn't offer such an argument themselves, this is the kind of argument that the skeptic has an affinity for, or can really understand the intuition that gives rise to it. So, we're going to now take a look at some of the justification that Clifford offers for each of the premises. Then we're going to turn these into logical form and show how deontic and doxastic logic can come together to kind of prove this argument. So, Clifford defends this point by claiming that while we can act against our beliefs, the ship owner refitting the ship even though he believes it is safe, We cannot rationally assess our actions when we have firm beliefs on one side of a decision. Similarly, we cannot separate a single biased belief from our whole structure of beliefs and hold it at arm's length while we assess a decision, since all of our beliefs are connected. Basically, what Clifford is saying is, even if we do act against our beliefs, even if the ship owner gets the ship refitted, even though he has this unjustified belief that it is not seaworthy, there is that poison in his reasoning, that spoiling of his justification that causes those problems and may at a later date cause him to make a poor choice or not act correctly because he has that belief within him. And because we have this big web of beliefs that we can't really separate why we choose one decision over another, we may be influenced by a lot of factors. Rarely is there one and only one motivating factor in making a decision. We may not always realize when we are influenced by those beliefs that are unjustified. And if we cannot rationally assess our actions with unjustified beliefs, then it seems morally wrong and intellectually dishonest to claim that we have given an unbiased and rational assessment of our actions while maintaining unjustified beliefs. So, it's obligatory that when we are conducting that unbiased rational assessment of our actions, that we get rid of all of our unjustified beliefs. Now, for premise 2, Clifford's going to defend this with the thought experiment that we just talked about. So this position is defended by the thought experiment at the beginning of the paper. There's also another interesting thought experiment there. I highly recommend that you read the paper and then reference back to this video if you're still confused. If you think that we should hold the ship owner responsible for taking actions and forming beliefs based on a bias, it would cost money, and irrational, Providence will protect them, assessment of his actions, then surely anyone that makes a similar decision should be held equally accountable for the results of their biased, irrational assessment, or for even the possible results of their biased, irrational assessment. Once again, even if the ship were to come out completely fine, the ship owner would still be culpable for holding those unjustified beliefs. Now, we're going to take a look at the form of this argument logically. You may want to offer this argument differently logically. This is one interpretation of it. Let's take a look. So, let's take B as a belief, S as a subject, A as an action, S can take, R as a reason. URA is going to be a relation between a subject and an action, which can be read as S gives an unbiased rational assessment of action A. And therefore, we have this. For all subjects S and all actions that S can take, and all beliefs B, it is obligatory that if S gives an unbiased rational assessment of A, then it is not the case that S believes that B, and it is not the case that there exists some reason R such that S believes that R, and R justifies B. Hopefully that makes sense. Basically, what we are saying is it's obligatory that if you give an unbiased rational assessment of an action, then it's not the case that you believe some belief B that does not have a reason R which justifies it. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. If you're confused by it, once again, check out the videos on doxastic and deontic logic. Now, we'll once again give an interpretation of premise 2, where S is a subject, A is an action that S can take, URA is a relationship, which can be read as S gives an unbiased rational assessment of action A. So here we have, for all subjects S and all actions that S can take A, it is obligatory that S give an unbiased rational assessment of A. All right. And finally, for our conclusion, where S is a subject, B is a belief, and R is a reason, we have, for all subjects S and all beliefs B, it's obligatory that if S believes that B, then there exists some reason R that S believes which justifies B. Hopefully this makes sense. Once again, you can interpret this argument in a lot of different ways. This is just one interpretation to attempt to show the way that we can use deontic logic and doxastic logic together, right? So, I would encourage you now, if you are a student of logic, as I hope you are, and if you have been watching all of these videos on modal logics, that you try this problem right now. I've given you 2 premises and a conclusion using the rules of modal logic and the many rules of propositional calculus, predicate calculus, and categorical logic. Everything that we've learned so far, try to prove it. But if you've already done that, or you just want to see the answer, let's take a look. So the first thing I would do is universally instantiate all of those variables out of premise 1 to an x, a y, and a z. Then I would use our deontic axiom K to distribute that obligation. That should be on premise 3, not premise 2. Then on premise 2, I would use a universal instantiation to universally instantiate our x and y again. Then just good old-fashioned modus ponens to get our statement of obligation, which should look pretty similar to our conclusion. It's not quite there yet because it has a conjunction instead of an implication, but it's a negated conjunction, so we can use De Morgan's law and double negation to distribute that negation and then get rid of the 2 negations in front of our existential quantifier in front of the reason. And then, of course, this is just the definition of implication we can use here to get that nice implication. This looks basically like our conclusion, but now what we're going to do, of course, is to use universal generalization to put those quantifiers back at the beginning of the statement and give our final conclusion. Hopefully that made sense. Go through it again if you're confused, or just check out the videos on mostly propositional calculus and predicate calculus is what's going to help you with this. But we did use our deontic axiom K, and we have a great video on that as well. Now, Clifford states his conclusion in no uncertain terms. According to Clifford, unjustified belief is always wrong. For Clifford, the way that you arrive at your belief is much more important than what you believe. It is better to believe something false, but have a great deal of evidence for it, than to take something true on faith. Quote Clifford, to sum it up, it is wrong, always, everywhere, and for anyone, to believe anything upon insufficient evidence. Clifford turns these claims now on the idea of religious faith. This is why we have our lovely yellow background, and we are talking about an important debate in the philosophy of religion. Because, as with all beliefs, Clifford's most grievous concern is with beliefs that are unfounded. He takes issue with people that take anything, even religious claims, on faith. According to Clifford, these people are not merely incorrect in their beliefs, but rather they are evil and morally wrong for doing so. To emphasize this point, Clifford quotes Coleridge, "He who begins by loving Christianity better than truth will proceed by loving his own sect or church better than Christianity and end loving himself better than all." This is an important argument for the philosophy of religion because, while many other arguments go back and forth on whether or not God exists and really tackle metaphysical questions of the existence of God, the possibility of God, the necessity of God, and so on, this deals with an ethical question about belief in God. Clifford doesn't take issue with whether or not God exists. What Clifford takes issue with is you, as someone who has insufficient evidence for holding the belief that God exists, believing in it, first. And second, not only does he say you are wrong, Clifford goes a step farther. He says that you are morally wrong. You are not ethical. You are evil for doing so. Many philosophers have objected to Clifford's strict constraints on ethical belief over the years. It does seem, for someone who's perhaps not a skeptic, that these put unattainably high standards on what we could morally believe. The most well-known of these objections comes from William James, and will be explained in the next video. But as anyone who's seen another video I've done on William James and his pragmatism as a skeptic, I'm going to object very severely to William James's position. But For anyone who claims that they have no time to investigate their own beliefs, Clifford has this strong message. "But," says one, "I am a busy man. I have no time for the long course of study which would be necessary to make me in any degree a competent judge of certain questions, or even able to understand the nature of the arguments." Then he should have no time to believe. Up next, we are looking at the response to this paper, the famous response by William James, The Will to Believe, in our short series here, going from William Clifford versus William James. Watch this video and more here at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.